This is Radical Love Live, an ongoing series of podcasts and special events where we explore faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark and Kelly Wilson. Well, hello there, Radical Love Live listeners. It's Mark. So I'm starting this episode off by myself. This is the second time this has happened. And I think it's almost intentional because it just so happens we have the same guest that this happened the last time, and that is Colby Martin.
This feels very personal, Kelly. This feels very personal.
I know. And so here's the story. Kelly's supposedly going to be in here in about 15 minutes, but Colby and I wanted to get this conversation started. And yes, Colby, you should probably take this personally. So we will have this conversation with Kelly once he shows up, but we're not going to stop for you guys. So Kelly will be here when he's here. In the meantime, let's start talking to Colby. It's good to have you back, my friend.
Yeah, it's good to be here. What I'm learning is, so your show is Radical Love Live. What I'm learning is Kelly does not take the live part as seriously as you do. So he's like radical love when I get to it. When it's convenient for me, my love will be radical.
Oh my God, what a great bird already. You are on fire. So
he's not here to defend himself. It's the perfect time. And he can only know that I said that, hours from now, if he ever listens back to it. So
that's right. Go, oh, good burn. So listeners, folks, family, community, I hope you listened to the conversation we had with Colby back in December, because it was the funniest episode I have ever recorded. Colby brings a sense of humor to the discussion of faith and spirituality that I've not encountered with a lot of other folks. People tend to be pretty serious about this stuff. And he breaks the rules there. We talked about a variety of things. In case you didn't listen, so quick summary, we talked about how he has audited his own faith. Let's see what else. You called him your Jenga, right? Pulling your Jenga pieces out.
I probably did. I probably grabbed about 7 different metaphors and just forced the audience to follow along. Like, I'm not going to explain when I'm switching metaphors here. Keep up.
And actually, I followed, and so I appreciate it. So the Jenga block, and then we ended the conversation about you telling us what happened the day you merely posted something about in support of Obama overturning Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then things happened.
Is that where we left off?
That's where we left off.
What a Sylvester Stallone moment, man! We are just hanging on the cliff. So should we pick back up there? Was that your lead in?
That is my lead in, my friend. So you were telling us, and Kelly did add in a little color there, that you gave us the Cliff Notes version of what happened in our last time together, and that if folks do want to read the details, you have it in the book on Clobber. But I want you to take what, we know that you were told on a Tuesday, don't come back.
That's correct. I did not come back
from there. You did not come back. Yeah, they're like, yeah, okay, you're done. Here's your final check. Please don't call us.
I think so. What it was is I got to the office on Tuesday after having maybe posted on I don't remember the exact timeline. But it was a couple days of chaos and what do PR people do? Manage
crisis management.
Thank you. Yes, I was managing crisis. Summoned to the board meeting.
You were the crisis.
I was the crisis.
Yes.
Good gravy. I remember some of those phone calls.
Wow.
Because back then we talked on the phone. If it was today, we would have just texted everything, which would have been nice because then it would have had a paper trail.
Right.
So they summoned me to the emergency board meeting on Friday, which you never want to have the word emergency in front of board meeting. Like, there's just never a time where like that's going to be great. And so I get to the board meeting, and I remember the day before getting prepped for this board meeting because I know what it's about. And so I'm like, I'm going to come prepared to this. So I typed out, ended up being 10 pages long. I mean, what's wrong? Why am I so verbose? Why do I spend so much time overly explaining myself? Writing out 10 pages in which I start off trying to appeal to the heart of these men. Like, guys, it's like I hear Mufasa, remember who you are. Like I'm trying to like remember, you guys are not. We're in this together. Like we've been doing this ministry thing for 5 years. You know who I am. You know my heart. You know that we agree on so many things. And now let me pivot and share with you some of what I've learned the last year or so on this topic in particular. And I didn't want to just go off the cuff. I didn't want to walk in there and just rely, because adrenaline would have been flowing, nerves, anxiety. I might have defaulted into my trauma response, which is a kind of fawning behavior where I just sort of roll over and like, no, whatever you guys need from me. I'm sorry for disrupting everything.
Yeah.
My God, I can't do that. I got to go in there and like legit speak the convictions of my heart. And so I did. I came with a prepared statement. So I don't know, 3 minutes into the meeting, they asked me the silver bullet question of like, what do you think about, same-sex marriage or whatever it was? I'm like, funny you should ask. I've got, and I had copies for everybody, right? So 10 pages times 10 men. So I exhausted a small bush trying to get everybody in the room to get on the same page with me. And
literally,
yes. And I passed them all out and read it through. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's all coming back to me, to quote Celine Dion. Wait, is that Celine Dion? It's all good. No, it's not. I don't remember who that was. Some listener correct me on who did that song. But the day before that meeting, I shared that letter with my boss, the lead pastor. And I got to the end of it, and he goes, "I'll be honest with you. If you read this tomorrow, this will basically be a resignation letter." Like, because he wasn't obviously affirming himself, and that was the first time he was realizing that I was.
Yeah.
And so, I went into it knowing this is. I mean, I knew that anyway. I didn't need him to tell me that. It was just the bluntness of it was. Yeah. All right. Well, this is what's happening. I'm not going to continue living in this disintegrated place where the convictions of my heart are being locked inside for this long. So I read the letter on Friday. They dismissed me while they deliberated. I remember sitting in, how I forget what your church background is, but in the evangelical
Episcopalian.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have cry rooms in the Episcopalian world, because most Episcopalians are comfortable with small children in the service. Like that's just part of it. But
it's part of the experience. Exactly. The
evangelicals
crying, wailing babies right there with us in the pews.
No, man, we evangelicals, we need to have a perfection and excellence is somehow the highest thing that we can value in our Sunday services. So everything has to be perfect, and crying babies are a disruption to that. So we built these little cry rooms where mothers can go with their children to be removed from the perfection of the service. Anyway, so I'm sitting in the cry room and with another of the pastors and his wife, and someone brought us Chipotle, and I'm sitting there eating my carnitas bowl, waiting for the deliberation of the board to finish. They bring me back in, and they're like, "Yeah, don't come in on Sunday. We're gonna fill your spot on the stage while we sort of sort this out." And so I didn't go to church that Sunday, which meant I never really got to say goodbye to my church, because it all happened that week. So didn't go that Sunday. Then Monday was our day off. And when I came back Tuesday morning, it was just my boss and one of the other elders, and they handed me my letter of termination effective immediately. And of course, they didn't specify in the termination letter what the specifics of the firing was. It was pretty vague. It was like, over matters of theological issues central to the gospel or something like that, something where they could sort of feel good about themselves and show people, look, we defended the truth of the gospel, everybody. But they're not actually going to say what, because that would require them to take a stance, which to this day, they still have not taken a stance on. Like to this day, Mark, I will receive emails or messages through my social media platform from people that have attended that church thinking that it was a safe place for them and their family, only to eventually get close enough to what I call the Holy of Holies, which is the actual truth of the organization, to find
Yeah.
out, oh, I'm actually not affirmed here.
You got to be effing kidding me.
Oh,
So
no,
there,
no.
there are actually queer members in this congregation community,
Oh, yeah.
and oh my God, how horrible is that?
This is welcome to the new evangelical world. It's called welcome but not affirming. Yes, we welcome everybody. All people are welcome here, even our website, regardless of race and orientation, social economic. It's all freaking bait and switch, man. It's bait and switch. And once you get close, like you're there long enough, or you go to serve in a particular way, or maybe you actually want to get married, then they'll reveal the fine print, which is, oh, I'm sorry, like we actually need you to not be gay if you want to be a member or if you want to serve in this role. And yeah, we can't actually marry you, but man, we love you and you're welcome here. It's utter bullshit, the bait and switch that happens.
So true. So I don't have that experience. You know, I skipped all that because of what happened to me as a kid and just, just being away from it. So I don't know any of that. And I read, and you remind me just in that sharing that's exactly what happens. That, it's like the thing that I hate most is love the sinner, hate the sin. It's like, that's bullshit. Don't do that.
Yeah.
That's like the worst thing you could do to somebody.
That's right.
Yeah. I would rather you tell me to my face, yeah, you're whatever. I'm fine. You could tell me I'm going to burn in hell forever. I mean, it's not okay, but I know how to process them. I'm basically going to flip you off and I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
But if you're going to try to slip me in there and then try to, I don't know, clean me up and make me redeem myself.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. Brene Brown says that clarity is kindness, right? There's a kindness,
Amen.
clarity that even if it's not what a person wants to hear in terms of like this, the old church I'm thinking of, which I started naming them a couple years ago. So I'm fine with it. They're called the Grove. They're in Arizona. So the Grove and churches like it, the people in the community who are themselves queer affirming and think their church is, because the church is pretty, it's pretty social justice-y in lots of other ways. Like they were and still are really committed to things of racial justice and social justice and all that. So
which is noble, of course. Yes.
Oh, 100%. That's part of why I had so much overlap in my time there. They want the church. So clarity is kindness. So even though ultimately, the family and the church might wish that the Grove was affirming of them, if they were clear about it to say, you know what, here's our actual position, it would bum them out because they'd probably decide to do a different church. But now they know, like they can make that decision on their own. Like they would be treated with the respect enough to say, this is, to make an informed decision. So clarity is kind.
Absolutely.
But I want to go back, Mark, because I'm with you insofar as the barf factor of love the sinner, hate the sin. Yeah. Like there's a cringe there.
Yeah.
And I also feel that, and I'm not saying this to disagree with you. You might, when I'm finished talking in about another 27 minutes from now, you might be like, oh, I agree with you. But I would say, yes, it's cringy and gross. And at the heart of it, I actually can empathize and affirm what that bumper sticker is attempting to name.
Okay, go for it. Enlighten.
And I'm going to take it out of the context of queer people for a moment, because on its surface, what the saying is attempting to do is it's attempting to call people to a recognition that when it comes to the identity, here's how I frame it. When it comes to the identity of every human, I believe that every human being is a child, like full stop. I don't think there's any other option, honestly. There's no other way that a person could be born made of the same freaking eternal stardust that everything has come out of, that connects all of us. There's no way that a person could be born and not be part of that. Ergo, since they're part of that, and that we're talking about is the isness of everything, and the isness of everything can't be anything other than God or the divine. So therefore, everybody that is born is part of the divine. even the phrase imago Dei, image of God, I love, but it kind of sometimes creates a separation. Like here's God and here's you, the image of it.
Yep.
Even tighter than that. Like it's not just the image of God. Like Paul says, God is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. We can't even be apart from the divine. So anyway, all people are loved children of God. So I think the phrase love the sinner is, if I'm going to steel man this position, right? Straw man is we set up a really crappy version of your belief so that I can easily knock it over. Steel man is I'm actually going to articulate your position in a way that you would sign off on to show you that I understand what you're saying. So to love the sinner is a way to say, I actually don't have any option available to me other than to love everybody, because everybody is a loved child of God. Like I have to start there because there's no place in which I can judge the identity of anyone else. Like I don't even have an option for that. I have to love everybody, right? And then the second part, hate the sin, is, again, if I am being as charitable as possible here, it is a way to name, and everyone harbors within them the capacity to bring about pain and harm and suffering. Everyone has that. So that Francis Spufford is this British author who has a book called Unapologetic. So Francis Spufford his way of talking about sin is the human propensity to fuck things up. And he says, we all have that. Everyone has.
We sure do.
Every human has the propensity to fuck things up, whether that is to hurt ourselves or to hurt others.
Yeah.
So to hate the sin is I think a way to name that we all have this potential to bring about harm and suffering to ourselves and to others. And that part we actually can talk about. We can talk about that. Now, it has to be done really carefully. Really carefully. This is why Jesus says, if you want to take the splinter out of someone's eye, you got to deal with the log in your own first. Like,
yeah, buddy.
He's not saying don't ever address the splinter in someone's eye. He's not saying that. He's saying, if you're going to do it, right? If you're going to do it, tread carefully, because it's real easy. The measure that we judge others is we're going to be judged right back ourselves. So you got to be real careful when you do it. So if you're going to do it, step one, deal with your own plank in your eye. So love the sinner, I think, hate the sin is a way at best to name. I can judge, which is to say have an opinion about, which is to say discuss with. I can judge a person's actions. I cannot judge their identity. I just don't get that's off the table for me. I will always have to love you, always have to see you as a loved child of God. That part is set in stone. That's eternal. But I don't have to always be okay with the way that you bring about pain, suffering to yourself or others. Now, we put this back into the topic of LGBTQ people, and it doesn't apply, right? It doesn't apply, because what they're saying is hate the sin. People are like, well, me being gay is not a sin. So you can't separate that from me. But anyway, that's my attempt to kind of charitably engage with love the sin or hate the sin.
So,
did Kelly just finally show up?
Yes, he sure did.
What up, kid dog?
Off at school.
He's blaming it on his kid. Wow.
I think he saw Colby Martin on the schedule and he's like, damn it, not again. All right, I'm going to be at least 20 minutes late this time.
No, it was the Garden State Parkway.
Oh, he's going to blame it on the Garden State Parkway.
Drivers of New Jersey.
Oh, that's what it is. They're the ones. They're the bane of your existence and tardiness.
Yes, indeed. Although I'm becoming one of them. Every time I pass somebody on the right, Grace is like, "You're so from New Jersey."
You're so from New Jersey. So Colby and I were just actively in a. You thought I was going to disagree. I can't disagree. You. It's not even that you defended the point. You actually enlightened me a bit about how to frame love the sin or hate the sin in kind of at a higher level. Right now, I don't know if you heard the last part. It works great outside of the queer context, right? Because talking about our belief, and you and I have had this conversation, that we are all children of the divine, as I say, or children of the God. Absolutely, unequivocally, we're all made of the same stardust. At subatomic level, there is no separation. There is pure oneness there. And when we realize that, then we're all a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. The second thing that Colby was bringing out was then in case of that, in that situation, then we have no choice but to love inside of that. That's an absolute, which I agree as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the part where we can all be real assholes, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all have that capacity, but we can also redeem. So therefore, if you look at it, we can love the person, but we can detest what they do.
Let me think about that for a second.
Let
I
him
do
process
remember
that.
that part in Genesis where it says we can all be assholes. I think that was shortly after the fall.
So it's second chapter, yes.
Well, there's definitely, I mean, it's funny. I was just having a conversation online with a family member about a political figure who represents a lot of things that I detest and who we sometimes talk about.
Mm-hmm.
This political figure being somebody who we need to, as Christians, love.
He is the person. If we're talking about that one, he is the one.
There's hundreds, but
but that one is the one I am called to love, and I use him as my example.
Yeah, yes. and I've used that as an example because I remember when we are talking about Donald Trump, by the way. For our listeners,
guys, I gotta go. I gotta go. Forget
it. When he was elected, and there was a lot of huge outpouring of emotion. My kid was not that old at the time, and really was worried, like, oh my gosh, the world is ending. We've given our country over to this like horrible, horrible person. And we had to stop and be like, okay, let's put this a little bit into perspective. Because I mean, the president is a really powerful figure, but not the most powerful figure in the world, or even like in the universe. Like there's still like God, and there's still people, and there's still, like that. There are some checks and balances in government and all that. And also, like, this guy might be a real jerk and represent a lot of values that we don't value, but he's somebody's dad. He's somebody's husband. I mean, he might be a terrible husband, but he's a child of God. Like, he's struggling. Like, he's got, a lot of needs that he's trying desperately to fill. And there's some part of us that needs to feel a little, like maybe a little bad for him. That, that there's a way that we can love while still detesting what they do. I mean, that's one example. I mean, it certainly can flip on its head, that, like we see this week, the news about that kid down in Oklahoma.
Oh God,
the transgender child that was beaten by their classmates and subsequently died.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to unpack there. It was a really heartbreaking story, but there's a culture down there that has been hounding transgender people and going after them legislatively. And there's a thread of love the sinner, hate the sin that also goes through that, where there's a whole group of people who are like, the way that we're going to show you love is by restricting your self-expression because we think we're protecting you from a worse punishment later on. And that's where that kind of like love the sin, hate the sinner thing can turn, and the hate the sin really quickly overcomes the love the sinner part.
Mm. Wow. And he brought it home in Colby, so that I teed up to you, my friend, because that takes us right where we had started, where we were talking just as Kelly was coming in. So.
Okay, I'm glad I caught it.
Yeah. I'm glad. By the way, it is good to see you, Kelly. As much as
likewise, good to see you, Colby.
As much as Mark, before you got here, was saying that he wished that it was just him and I the whole time, and he was bummed that you were going to show up at all. I'm actually glad that you're here.
Okay. Otherwise, you were going to be the new co-host.
Yeah. So
we actually did. I did ask him if that was the case. Yeah. Could he be the co-host? Yes.
Yeah. You were going to be the Kathy Lee. I was going to be the Kelly, and we got the Regis already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Marvin was going to be the Michael. So yeah, we had it all mapped out.
We all figured out. Yeah. You're a Regis man. Go find your boat.
Back to your desire to move votes towards Donald Trump. I would like to I'd like to say I think that this is part of why I loved the show Succession so much on HBO. I don't know if you guys watch that or if your audience is
Oh
familiar with,
yeah.
but part of why I loved it so much, I had some friends and even family members that couldn't watch the show because they're like, none of their characters are likable. I'm not rooting for any of them.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, but that's the brilliance of it. That's kind of that's why I'm drawn to it, because part of what I see happening in that, Kelly, is the humanization of what otherwise are pretty monstrous people. And in psychology, there's a term called infrahumanization, infra-I-N-F-R-A, infrahumanization. And infrahumanization is when we, whether consciously or subconsciously, remove secondary characteristics from another person. And by that, I mean all animals, all mammals share sort of primary characteristics of like fear and joy, just these things that kind of bind us to other dogs and dolphins and so on. But humans have unique like personality characteristics that are like secondary characteristics that make us separate from the animal kingdom. What happens is when we remove those from other people, whether we think we're doing it or not, what happens is in our minds we demote that person to nothing more than essentially a monster. And we treat them accordingly. So we treat that person like a monster. And the brilliance, and by brilliance I mean ironic, of the move of infrahumanization, the way that it works in our brains, the brilliance of it is that we can treat someone like a monster because they're no longer, we've dehumanized them. Yep. We can treat them like a monster and not feel bad about it, like, and still think that we are a good person, because we're not aware that what we've done is we've moved them from human to monster. And of course you would treat a monster like that. Like, of course you would. So that's actually consistent with my character of being a good person. That's why there's so many people that can just treat others like absolute garbage, and yet with a straight face say, I'm a decent person, I'm a good person. This is what infrahumanization is. And
interesting.
Part of why I love Succession is you get to see behind the curtain that, yes, on the surface, these are monstrous figures who care nothing but for themselves and their own bank account and their own positions of power and authority, etc. But nobody gets that way in a vacuum. Nobody does. Behind every monster is likely decades, if not generations, of unhealed trauma that informs how these people are the way they are. And what I hear you saying, Kelly, and I agree with you 1,000,000%, which is a lot of percents. Usually it caps out at 100, but I'm pushing it all the way to 1,000,000.
Wow.
Yeah. I know is we can, or I think the invitation is to step back from our initial repulsion at some of these figures in our world, step back from that. Not all the time, but every once in a while, it's worth it to step back and just sit with the reality that people like him, people are the way they are for a damn good reason. And that's probably because they have so many gaps in their knowledge about who they are, what's true about themselves, so many gaps in their knowledge about what's true about other humans. And all of these gaps are because of their own unhealed trauma. Their parents probably sucked, or they had their own experiences that informed how they are. And I think we can look at that with deep compassion that moves us to say, oh, of course you're that way. Of course you are. If I were you, I would be you, right? Thich Nhat Hanh, rest in peace. He has this path towards loving, because he's like, one of the most unique features about Jesus Christianity is this invitation to love your enemies, bless those who curse you. But how in the world do you do that? And Thich Nhat Hanh is a simple formula of understanding leads to compassion, and compassion leads to love. Yep. And when we look at our enemies, I would argue for many people, the political figureheads, these octogenarians that are right now our two candidates, they are the enemies for the people on the other side. Look at your enemy. Can you understand how they got where they got? Can you actually get to a place of understanding that? If you can, that leads to compassion of, oh, I don't have to like it. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to say, oh, it's fine then. Of course you can keep doing it, because no, it's just compassion of, oh, yeah, No wonder everything in your life is about manipulation of the truth, because the actual real truth is so scary for you. Like you are so
Mhm.
terrified to face what is real that you twist everything. Yeah, so that's why you do that. And once you have that compassion piece, the piece that goes, ugh, that opens up this pathway to love, because now you can see at the core they're a scared, fragile, insecure human being just like I am. Just like
Right,
I am.
right.
And suddenly they're not your enemy anymore. That's kind of the magic of this
Yep.
is, how do you love your enemy? Well, you got to get them to not be your enemy anymore. And then,
That's beautifully said. To the point to where we started off the conversation with picking up where the last episode ended with Colby telling us, how he was summarily dismissed over, his affirmation of the repeal of the don't ask, don't tell, and what happened that week of being sent out into the wilderness from his community.
Hmm.
So that's what led into, some of the things that in his particular church, they do the bait and switch, as Colby called it, where, they do super good things in racial justice and other social, efforts. But, they even have queer folk that are inside their community who don't know that they're actually not queer affirming. I know, right? That's mind blowing. But yet
Yeah.
what he's talking about is not, I don't think is out of the ordinary at all. Because,
this welcome but not affirming is ubiquitous within evangelicalism. It's the
Mhm.
new way to be, because and if you put yourself in their shoes, you can see how at a cultural level, it's not cool anymore to hate gay people, right? Like, it is sort of societally unacceptable, although the tide on that has been shifting the last couple of years. But
oof.
by and large, you have these churches that, that don't have affirming theology, but they want to not repel people away from their church, translation from being potential donors. And so they will make it very clear, everyone's welcome here. We love all people. Like, they really want to communicate that message, but they won't be clear about the fine print, which is, but the closer you get to the Holy of Holies, the more we're going to need you to not be gay. Like, that's kind of, but we're not going to say that out front. And so that in the evangelical world, it is rare. It is rare to come across an evangelical church that on their website will post, we take a traditional stance on marriage, and our church does not affirm those who are LGBTQ. Like, even though that's all their theological positions, they don't say it.
That's true.
You know,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, shortly after the Super Bowl, when the He Gets Us
Oh, yeah.
ads came out, I saw a lot of backlash online among progressive Christians who were like, "This is a big bait and switch. It's empowered by political money that's trying to funnel people into conservative causes, etc."
Yeah.
I scoured the He Gets Us website. I was really interested, for one, because I'm also an advertising copywriter, and I believe that it's okay sometimes for churches to spend a little money to advertise themselves. So I'm like, is it a matter of scale? Is it, that they spent too much money to advertise themselves? But I was looking for, on the He Gets Us website, I was like, where's the switch? Like, I see the bait, where's the switch?
Yeah.
And I looked through, and it's really beautifully done, where, it's all about inclusivity and, racial justice. And I was really specifically I'm looking for it now. I don't know if I'll find it while we're broadcasting, but I specifically went in to see, like, what do they say about gay people? What do they say about LGBTQ?
Mhm.
And the way that they put it was really interesting, because they were like, we believe that Jesus, I'm paraphrasing, that we believe that Jesus loves people of any sexual orientation. Read the Bible, learn what Jesus says, and you will know how Jesus feels about gay people. And I think what they're thinking is, like, if you study the Bible hard enough, you will eventually come to believe the way that we do. But you're welcome to come in and learn that. I think they'll be surprised if that could potentially backfire. That could also be somebody who goes in and says, "Oh, wow,
Yeah.
Jesus really does love a lot of the outcasts and doesn't get too hung up on
Yeah.
sexuality."
Yeah.
But it was just interesting that they because I was looking for that part where they would get to be like, and marriage is one man and one woman, and
Yeah.
we believe in the traditional sexual model, and that it's not there at all.
Yeah, that's a classic case, that ad. I remember obviously seeing those ads in real time. That's a classic case of getting it right, but for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like the ad was actually pretty sweet. Like I actually really, really liked it. It really did put a more, I would say, accurate face on what this movement of the Christ was originally intended to be. It's just, in this case, it was like a splash of lipstick on a pig. But my bigger problem, I don't know if it's bigger. One of my problems with the He Gets Us campaign, and this has been bugging me because they've been doing it for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And again, you have to already know the theology behind where these ads are coming from in order to really get the insidiousness of it. And Marvin, take out the word insidious. I'm kidding. Leave it in. Just here's my self-correction. I don't want to accuse any nefarious intent here. I can actually come at this from, again, a charitable perspective, saying that these are individuals who are acting out of their convictions as best as they can, and that's a noble effort, even if I happen to disagree with some of the convictions that probably reside in their hearts. But what frustrates me is I think there's a high degree of probability that the theology of those who are funding and creating these campaigns for He Gets Us very likely includes a kind of doctrinal position where a majority of people, when they die, go to hell. And then they can split hairs from there, whether they're predestined to go to hell or whether it's, sort of free will, it doesn't matter. But I'm assuming their theology includes a scenario where most humans go to hell when they die.
That's sort of like the narrow road versus the wide.
Yeah. My problem with the He Gets Us thing, and again, I know in their minds, or they're intending it to be He in this context being Jesus, but even they would say that Jesus is God. And so on some level, the ad in their minds is saying that God gets us. But what frustrates the crap out of me with these ads is your theology maintains that God, in the final account of things, is perfectly fine either sending or allowing, again, we're splitting theological hairs, allowing people or sending people to burn forever in hell. And you're saying that God gets us? No, that's not the case, because if God gets us, God would look at the billions of people that in your theology are going to burn forever in hell and say, wait a minute, that person never had a frickin' shot to understand anything that might require the information necessary to pass through the pearly gates. Again, I'm in their theological world right now when I'm talking like this. He gets us. You're saying your God doesn't get the person who grew up being abused by their priest and then wants nothing to do with the church forever and ever, nothing to do with God, because all they have is a connection to this horrible, horrible, horrible traumatic experience. The God that gets that person would be like, I'm not going to hold it against you that you turned your back on everything having to do with Christianity, because of course you would. That's a God that gets that person, right? So this is my problem. This is my frustration with the ad campaign, is actually your God, according to your theology, doesn't get us. Your God's kind of a cold-hearted asshole who at the end of it says, yeah, sorry about your life, sorry about your rotten luck, but hell for you. That's not a God who gets us. Ugh. Okay, I'll drop the mic and take your comments off.
Wow.
So frustrating.
That's that whole notion of, and this is less Calvinist and more Arian, the idea, or Armenian rather, the Arians for the
I don't know.
You might want to
Very much Trump and now Arian. Guys, what is this show?
No, I meant the Arian heresy from back in the day.
There you go. That the original.
That Arian.
Wrong area. The Armenian
There we go.
way of thinking is that you have to believe a certain theological truth in order to be saved. that somehow this has to have taken root in your brain. And is that by choice, as a gift from God? I don't know. But it's, if you do not have this specific belief, then you are not saved. Then you're like on the road to hell. And I think about somebody like, and this is a touch point in a lot of these kind of discussions, is like somebody like Gandhi, who studied Christianity and was like, oh, this is a really interesting part of the truth. I really wish that your Christians were a lot more like this Christ that you're teaching about. Yet he was part of this other tradition that actually predated Christianity by quite a bit, and had no reason to make a leap and be like, okay, now Jesus is the only way to, the only way to heaven. And that's where it was Rob Bell used that as the touch point in the beginning of his book, Love Wins. Is he was in a gallery somewhere and there was a picture of Gandhi, and somebody had taken a sticky note and been like, he's burning in hell anyway. Like, somebody went out of their way to point out that this good person, simply by virtue of not accepting Jesus as the very only true way to get to heaven, was excluded. And that has always gotten me. The fact, like, the idea of a God who wouldn't get somebody who's in a completely different religious system, who has no reason to become Christian. Like, I would think that God would understand that.
And again, if it's just, I love what you're saying, Kelly, if it's just a mental game of people having to acquiesce to some doctrinal statement to pass some sort of cosmic test, then we have just rendered the number of variables that make that unattainable for people, whether it's cognitive disabilities or some sort of mental health thing that will never even, it couldn't even get to that sort of theological place, even if they wanted to. It's just not even available to them, let alone the billions of people who've never heard any of the information that theoretically would be needed to sort of pass the pearly gates. So again, I am so with you on that. And when you talk about the notion of Gandhi burning forever, my mind goes to, again, what kind of God would receive, and maybe this isn't the point of this show, so we can move on from this topic, but what kind of God would receive the multiple millions of Jewish individuals who were burned in concentration camps, and after just being burned, then says, oh, but also you're not a Christian, so now continue burning. That's not a God.
Oh my God.
That God gets, anyway, that is just a demonic deity that makes sense from a very rudimentary, primitive mindset that Jesus was, I think, attempting to elevate people's consciousness beyond. And, some people, by the grace of the divine, have been able to move into that elevated consciousness. Others are still stuck in this very myopic, primitive, fear-based religious way of seeing the world.
So, Colby, to answer that question, now this is exactly why we do what we do with Radical Love Live, is to have these kinds of conversations. So it's spot on. These are things that we know our listeners and ask themselves. And so here's an opportunity for us to share our points of view. And just this entire conversation has been one that I hope lots and lots and lots of people hear, just to know that others think like them. We're not the only three in a podcast who think like this. There's because it doesn't make sense. And the way you just ended it with that example of Jews being burned in the concentration camps, and then being relegated to an eternity and a further eternity of damnation and all of that other stuff. That's no, that's not a God that I want to be a part of. So I am going to take it to Clobber. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I love the work you're doing, and I don't think we've done enough conversation on what good work you do that was born out of, well, not out of your termination, because you already started this. You talk about your own auditing and deconstruction of your love for queer people, which you didn't have anybody in your family that compelled you. This is something that was just inside of you. You were asking that question. So let's kind of pick it up from there. And then let's talk about the work you're doing with Clobber. So,
Thanks, Mark. So, Yeah, so I did get fired on that Tuesday when I came back to work, effective immediately. And what yes, you're not wrong insofar as to call back to previous parts of our conversation. I was auditing parts of my faith prior to that.
Yep.
But it certainly, I just want to affirm your initial impulse to say the work that came out of it. Because really the getting fired from that church was, the inciting incident, to
Yep.
use a term from the narrative world, was the inciting incident that really catapulted me into a new, more free place to do this work from. Because once
Mhm.
the shackles were off, that sort of kept me hidden in this in that world. Then I got to just be more fully integrated with myself. And once that happens, that's like
Mm.
game over. I mean, that is all of the best stuff in life is on the other side of once a person finds wholeness. And this is what the Greek word for saved, sozo, S-O-Z-O. Sozo doesn't mean what happens to you when you die. Sozo was a word to talk about wholeness and integration and being put back together again. So to be saved is to be made whole, right? So me getting fired was like my salvation moment of being made whole. And this is the beauty of the path of Jesus. Quick side note: when one of the first things that happened in the Gospels is that Jesus gets baptized by his cousin John, and there's this moment that people described as the heavens opening up, and there seemed to be this voice. They assume it was God who said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." That's the moment when Jesus's public ministry began, because
Yeah.
he now had the full integration, the full awareness of who he was. Like that was his salvation moment, his wholeness moment. So yeah, me getting fired was now the real work can begin. And I don't mean to say that the previous decade of ministry prior to that wasn't real, but it's just it leveled up. It leveled up from that point. Um, but first, it had to get real hard and scary and dark, which is a no-brainer. Right? You gotta lose it all before you can begin to rise. I mean, this is the classic legend of the Phoenix. And it's so boringly cliche because it's so accurately
But
true.
because it's so accurate,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Somebody like me that had to, come to the very end of the road of my deep alcoholism, and that is not uncommon for people to realize. This was the end of the road for me. I was going to be forced into something else, but that was also, as you said, my inciting moment where it put me on the path that I'm on today, and I would not be on this path had that not happened.
That's
So,
right. Yeah.
so bless those inciting incidents. Some call it grace, prevenient grace, whatever whatever phrase you want to use for it. You need to have that pivotal moment where you are actually stripped down. It's not the most convenient way to do it, but it brings you to bear, right? And you will go from there. So, yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't. I mean, it doesn't work otherwise,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
the person who's never experienced whether it's Saint John of the Cross, Dark Night of the
Yeah.
Soul, whatever it is, the person who has never endured that, they just don't have access to the deeper reservoir of the fullness of life. And it's I'm not belittling or bemoaning the person who's lived a sort of cush, unbothered life. I pity them only insofar as like there's so much more to life that's on the other side of great sorrow and deep loss and deep grief. Like there's so much more there that nobody, and we know this on the other side of it, Mark, right? You just said it. On the other side of it, you can look back and you can say, holy shit, that was the worst, hardest time in my life.
Mhm.
Yet now I'm grateful for it. Like how crazy is
I
that?
know. What a crazy
Right?
concept, right? I'm grateful.
So crazy. I actually think, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about this lately, that again, this is the second time I'm quoting Thich Nhat Hanh, and I'm not even going to apologize for it.
Nice.
But he says that when we learn to suffer better, we can suffer less. When we learn to suffer, when we get better at suffering, we experience suffering less. And for me, one of the ways that I can get better at suffering is to reduce the gap of that time between when the pain, sorrow, loss, grief happens, reduce the time between that and when I find the gratitude for it, right? The more you can reduce that and find a kind of gratitude in the midst of this is, I mean, there's so many parts where Paul is, consider it joy when you endure the kind of suffering and the pain. Like, and you think, oh, sadist, masochist, like that's so weird. Who would ever like, oh no, actually I can see the virtue in that. The virtue in reducing that time between being grateful for the suffering and the suffering itself, because the minute you start to inject gratitude into it, it starts to alleviate the suffering because it gives meaning to the suffering. And that's what we need in life is we need meaning and we need purpose. And without that meaning and without that purpose, we just flail into a nihilistic sadness that nothing means anything, but gratitude gives meaning to it. So anyway, what was I saying before that? I don't remember.
I don't know. I just love the fact that you riff. I mean, we were talking about a Clobber trying to get to, this, what you do, this noble work.
Oh yeah.
But you keep sharing like the basis of you and what you bring into it. And I don't stop, keep going.
Yeah. So yes, that was that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, I got fired. Yes, it led to the greatest ministry now of my life, but the firing wasn't this fireworks parade of excitement. It was hella hard, man. Like we had to sell our home, which, we were first time home buyers, and we bought back in 2008 or 9, which was not a great time to buy, but if we could have held on to it, then it would have been great, but we couldn't hold on to it because we had to move and get out of town. And so that set us in a financial hole that we've never recovered from, just never have recovered from. So, so that's one downside to it. The loss of community. I mean, you can't understate how painful that is. And anybody who's listening to this and has experienced a kind of, rejection or expulsion from their faith community or familial community, that sort of pain where you used to have 47 people on a list of folks you could call in the middle of the night, and now it's been reduced to 3, and even 2 of those you're not totally sure. And to never hear from them again, like that's a kind of pain that you don't wish upon anybody. And then having to move back to Oregon, to live near family again, to try and just figure out what was next in my life. I mean, it was incredibly excruciatingly painful and hard. And also the pile of shit that was turned out to be the greatest fertilizer to produce this beautiful garden of ministry now that I get to do in and with and for those who identify as LGBTQ. Wouldn't trade it for the world.
I'm so grateful you're on with us. I feel like we could just keep this going and going and going. Maybe we will, who knows? But the word ministry you use, and I've not thought about what you do in that, but it's exactly what you're doing. And so we only have a few minutes left. Where do we go about talking about this good work you do through Clobber, not just with the book, but the workshops and everything else? Like, what can you tell us in 4 minutes?
Nothing in 4 minutes. But thanks for asking. No, yeah. So the book Clobber that came out in 2016, the second edition with some edits and updates and study guide and an extra chapter came out in 2022. So that's easy to find. Google Unclobber or go to unclobber.com. I also created online courses out of this material. So if people maybe don't want to read, or they want to go deeper with it, or they just like the video lecture format with blanks you can fill in, which are really exciting and fulfilling for lots of people, you can go to unclobber.com again, courses that you can get and take at your own pace. A couple times a year, I host live virtual workshops where people can join in from all around the country and we can work through this material together. And then this year I've been doing and will continue to do traveling and doing workshops in person. I'll show up and maybe a church will host a 5-hour workshop, or maybe like in South Carolina a few weeks ago, there were 10 churches that all came together and hosted this day of working through this material. And so, and Mark, you and I were talking about this before we started, how the reality is a majority of churches in America are still not affirming. Like, and the numbers aren't even really close. Like, I don't know what the actual breakdown is, but it's more than 90% still of churches in America are not affirming. So this ministry is not going away anytime soon. And I consider it pure joy and an honor to get to play my part in it, which is just a part, right? I'm just one person with a particular story and perspective, helping to do my part of lifting this heavy rock that I hope is not a Sisyphean quest. I don't think this rock is going to fall back on us. Yeah. I think we have enough people that are going to continue to keep pushing this thing forward, that eventually will tip the scales, and this will be. Remember back in the day when queer people like weren't affirmed in churches? Man, that was wild. Like, we're gonna get there. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I'm gonna give it what I got, nonetheless.
Yeah, I hope eventually it'll be like divorce or drinking beer or something. That it'll be like, do you remember back when
or segregation in churches, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
The thing that we managed to get past.
Yes.
Like, we can do this, church. We can.
This might be a little bit off topic, but I also do want to recommend to our listeners the Perspective Shift.
Thanks.
This is, I've been following Colby's Substack, the Perspective Shift.
There you go. Tell us about it.
Well, I really appreciate the way that you are willing to share very personal experiences from your journey just as a human, that so many of us, this goes back to what we were talking about compassion and getting to know other people, and just getting to know that other people are sometimes in the same kinds of struggles that you are, can be really comforting and reassuring. So I just, I want to say that I appreciate when I get that email in my inbox, because you're just really open and transparent. And, I gotta imagine that it feels vulnerable and a little scary to share your story with the world, but but it is helpful to get a look into somebody else's life and just kind of daily journey.
Thanks, Kelly. That means a lot. And that's where I do a bulk of my work right now is perspectiveshift.co. And that's, I'm constantly writing and processing my thoughts there. So yeah, a lot of my work is in the LGBTQ affirming space, but I have other things that I talk about, think about, write about, and that's where all that is happening. So thanks for saying that. And it's a lot of fun.
Yep.
What a great conversation, my friend. I'm grateful for you. I love, as I said earlier, the synchronicity of the divine and how it brings people together. Yes,
for sure.
Our souls together. So with that, it's been a great conversation, Colby. Godspeed to your work and everything you're doing. And I hope we'll see you back on Radical Love Live. That would be awesome.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
Well, thank Mark, and then 3/4 of a thanks to Kelly.
Well, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad I could be part of this, and glad to catch up with you, Colby.
For sure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Colby. Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, co-hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. All rights reserved. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and other popular podcast platforms. Go to radicallovelive.com to learn more about us, watch recordings of our live events, and listen to our podcast. We also invite you to check out what Kelly and Mark are doing by going to our websites. Find Kelly at kellywilson.com and Mark at markdilcom.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.